In this video, I will explain all of the Inkscape path effects in detail and demonstrate how they work. Before I begin, let me explain what a path effect is. Path effects are functions in Inkscape that can be applied to shapes, paths, and group of objects. And they all create different effects. I have left timestamps for all path effects so you can skip to whatever you want to watch. And with that said, let's begin. And I'm just going to click right here on the rectangle tool and click right there, form a rectangle like that. And right there, this is a shape. This is not a path right now. If I press N to get the nodes tool, this doesn't give me nodes. It gives me this functionality right here to change its corners, but it doesn't actually give me nodes. So with that selected, if I come over to the path and click on object to path, it will turn this object into a path. If I press N to get the nodes tool, as you can see, we have 4 nodes on this object. And if I click on one of these nodes and I move him, I can warp the object. I can change its position. I can change its shape. And that is exactly what a node actually does. So now that we have made our path, let's apply the first path effect to it, which is the corners path effect. So click right here on this arrow. This will open up the path effect menu and click on corners. And before I do really anything, what I want to do is I just want to simply click on N on my keyboard to get the nodes tool, and I will get these 4 different nodes right here, these 4 circular nodes. These are what's going to allow us to edit the nodes of this object. Now in this case, this is a rectangle. Now before we turn this object into a path, we could change its corners. But now that this is a path, we can't actually change its corners as easily. So we'll have to actually apply a path effect to it to change the corners. The way the corner path effect actually works is you just take the circular node and you push it like that, and it will affect that corner like that. It will change that corner and make it smoother like that. Now, if you want a different type of corner, what you can do is right here, let's just go through these options. If I click on fillet, it gives me that option or that result. If I click on inner fillet, it does the exact opposite of it. It goes on the inside. If I click on chamfer, it does a straight edged kind of thing. And then if I go to inverse chamfer, it's not going to make any difference right now. But if I come over to chamfer again and I increase the chamfer steps, you see what happens. And now if I come over to inverse chamfer, it does the exact opposite. So that's that pretty clear. The chamfer steps increase the number of these straight edges right here. And yeah, and this is where you can control the type of corner you want. So there are more options available right here, like the units. This is just going to control the units of this radius right here, that the number you apply right here. So if I enter a number right here, like let's say I apply a radius of 5 points, and I move on to a different box, it's going to give me a radius of 5 points. And as you can see, if I zoom in, it's a really small radius. But if I change the units to a bigger unit like inches, you can see that it's so big now that it's going to warp the entire object. And we can also try another one. Let's say we can go with something like centimeters. Now it's kind of like in the middle of pixels and inches. So that's basically what the units do. Okay, so let's just see what these options do right here. If I check this radius option, which I'm actually not going to do right now, I'll come over to the radius option and I'll change the radius to like 30. And the unit is pixels. And if I click on the radius option, right here, radius in percentage, and I click right there, and I click away, and I change that value, the radius gets much bigger, because now what it's doing, instead of taking the radius value as 29 pixels, it's taking it as 29 percentage, meaning it's giving this object a radius of 29% of the object dimension. So that's really what it's doing. That's why it gets so much bigger right there. If I increase the size, it's going to get much, much bigger like that. It's going to warp the object. Let's go back to 0. This option right here, I barely really notice any difference with it, but you guys can play around with it. This almost barely does nothing. This right here, apply changes if radius is equal to 0, is quite interesting. So let's just see. Let me do this. Let me take this node and increase its radius like that. And now let me uncheck this option. And now if I come over to the radius option and I increase the value to, let's just increase it to like 50, it's not going to affect this corner. It's only going to affect the corners that were already at a radius of 0, that were completely, sharp corners. But if I check this, it's going to affect all corners. So if I change the value to 60, it turns all of them to a 60 radius value. And if I do the exact opposite, if I do that, and I'm gonna have to do that first. And now if I go ahead and change this value to 100, it only affects the value, the corners that are already have a radius greater than 0. It does not affect this corner. And this is another interesting option, change only selected nodes. If I select that node, if I select these two nodes, let's say I select these two nodes, I come right here and I change the value to 50. Okay, so for this option to work, you'll also have to make sure that you select these options as well. So let me change the radius now, and now you can see it only made the changes to these two selected nodes. It did not make the changes to this node or this node. We can try and again, let's select all of them, bring them down to 0. And now let me select this one. Let me increase the radius to 50. 50. And you can see that it only made the change to this single node only. And finally, if you select the hide nodes option, let me just come right here, do something right here. You can see all of the nodes right here, right? All of the nodes are completely visible. If I click right there on the hide nodes option and then click right there, it will hide all of the nodes. And so that's what that does. One last thing I want to go over is the method right here. So if I take any of these nodes right here, let me click right there. Let me take the circular node and move it all the way in like that. And I'm going to take this node or this knot and move it all the way in like that. And by default, the auto method actually does what the force arc method does. So if I change it to force arc, it doesn't change anything right here. But if I change this to the force Bezier method, as you can see, the curve changes. The shape of the curve changes just a tiny bit. So this can be useful for different types of shapes, and you're going to have to play around with what method works best for you. But that really is what the method actually does. It just changes the pathing of the curve a tiny bit. And so with that done, that is basically the entirety of the corners path effect. A lot of things to cover in there, but that really is everything about. And let's move on to the next path effect. Okay, so the next path effect that I will discuss is the knot path effect. And to begin, I'll click on the rectangle tool. I'll make a small rectangle like that. And make sure that the rectangle or the object you use for this does not have a fill color. It only needs to have a stroke. And if I press Ctrl D, you can duplicate that and bring that right here. And now with that selected, shift click on this object. With them both selected, press Ctrl G and group them together. And then come over to the path effects menu. And you want to select the knot path effect. And that right there is exactly what that does. It interlocks any two objects like that. And if you come out to the options right here, we have two options, which is the switcher size and the gap length. If I reduce the gap length, it's going to reduce the gap length right there. It's going to reduce the gaps between those objects. I'm going to go back and increase them so we can clearly see what that did. And then if I press N to get the nodes tool, I can see, okay, click right there, press N to get the nodes tool, I can see this diamond shaped node right here. And this right here is basically called the switcher. If I increase the size of it, it increases the area where I can click to actually edit that. But if I click on it, it changes the node right there. And if I click again, it changes it again. And if I click again, it goes back to the third option right there. Right here, we have these three options that we can look at. In units of stroke, width just means that it's going to apply the gap in units of the width of this actual, of the stroke of this object, and that's fine. Gaps in both does that. And actually, let's just take an example to see what the group's inverse option actually does. So let me delete this object, make another rectangle like that. Maybe let's scale it down to about that size, and then duplicate that. Bring that right here, and I'm come over and just change the stroke width to a much smaller value this time, about that much. And then I'll come over to the path effects, but before I do that, select both, Control G to group them together, and let's apply the knot path effect. And right here, as you can see, the knot is obviously uneven, which is fine. But if I click right there, that is what that does. And so that's really what that group's inverse option does. But this only really makes a change if you have an object that has different stroke values. And so that is it for the knot path effect. With that, let's move on to the next path effect. Okay, so the next path effect is the offset path effect, and that is quite simple to understand. Let me make a circle real quick. Hold Control and Shift, draw a perfectly round circle like that. And I'll give that a black fill color, remove its stroke since we don't need that. And I'll come over to Path and click on Object to Path, turn that into a path. And then with that selected, come over to the Path Effects menu and click on Offset. And right here you have this menu opened up. If I hold the plus icon and I keep increasing that value, that made the circle much bigger in size. And so that right there is basically what the offset path effect actually does. It will actually increase all the dimensions of an object equally in all directions. That's what it does. Let me take the example of another object like a rectangle or a square. Let's take a square first. Let me duplicate the square and let's change the color to a different color like that. And then come over to Path, Object to Path, and come over to the Path Effects menu, open up the Offset Path Effect. But this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the negative value, the minus sign, and I'm actually going to give it an inset. Right? That is what that does. It goes ahead and brings all of the dimensions of this object inside by equal amounts, by an equal distance. And then you also have this drop-down menu right here, which, let me open that up, which can be useful for different situations, depending on the type of object you are trying to create an offset for. So, but this will depend on the type of object you're using, and you're going to have to experiment what works where. Generally, if you want to create sharp edges and corners, you want to go with the miter option. And if you want to create a pointy arc, you can go with one of these extrapolated arc options. And the beveled option should give you kind of a cutoff edge, but you're going to have to play around with how that works for different in different situations. One more thing I want to explain just before I end this path effect. Let me make another rectangle a tall rectangle like that. Let's give that a black fill color. Let me duplicate that, bring that here. Let me click on that, duplicate that, click on that and duplicate that as well. And then shift click, select the top copies and give them that color. And then click right there and turn that into a path and give that an inset. And there you go, we've given that an inset. And it goes in equally by an equal distance in all directions. Right? All of its dimensions are getting smaller by the same amount. Now if I click on this object and I hold Control and Shift and scale this down like that, that is the difference we get. That is the difference between the scaling an object down versus creating an offset. If you want uniform shrinking of an object, then you use the offset option. If you do not want that, you just want an object to be smaller, you can just simply scale it down by holding Control and Shift. It will scale down proportionally like that. And proportional just means that it will scale down the side or the dimension of the object that is longer much more than the dimension that is shorter. So the height of this object is much greater than the width. The height will reduce much more and the width does not reduce as much. So that is the difference between just scaling an object versus actually applying the offset path effect. So that's it. Let's move on to the next path effect. Alright, so the next path effect I'm going to discuss is the power stroke path effect. And to do that, I'll press B to get the Bezier pen. I'll click right there and make a random path like that. And with that selected, come over to the Path Effects menu and click on Power Stroke. And as you can see, it's already applied. Let's just press N to get the Nodes tool. And let's just, on top of the canvas, let's just see how this actually works. We get these three pink nodes right here, these three diamond-shaped pink nodes. If I click on one of them and I pull it out, I can change the thickness of this object, of this part of the stroke. If I pull it out, I can change the thickness of that area around it. Pretty simple. That's basically what this path effect really does. You can control the thickness of different strokes very easily, and you can control how smooth they are and how they are. Now, let's go over all of these options one by one and see what they actually do. So width multiplier, right here at the top, if I increase that, everything gets thicker. And if I reduce that, everything gets thinner. Smoothing type is, if you change these options, it's going to give you different types of smoothing. So that's pretty clear as well. Just use the one you feel makes sense to you. The only thing I will say is that if you select this option right here, this third option, and you increase the smoothing actually does change. As you can see, smoothing does change. Now, if I go ahead and select any other option, if I move the smoothing slider, nothing actually happens. So that's basically what I'm going to say. But to be fair, you don't have to worry about the smoothing right here because you can just select the node and just smooth it out manually like that. Right? So we don't actually need the smoothing option, but it is there if you want to use it. This is the start cap, which is this area right here, this node, and it's on 0 width. You can change it if you want to. You can make it round and you can make it, whatever. You can make it square right here. As you can see, let me zoom in. You can see the difference. I can make it that way. I can make it peak, and I can make it back to 0 width. Sorry, I need to do this one. 0 width like that. And end cap, you can do the same thing right here as well. Join, you can change the joint right here. Let me zoom in on that. We zoom in like that. And you can change the joint to these different options. And the miter limit right here is going to control the sharpness of this corner when you select the miter option right here. So if you select a value that is too low here, it might actually give you something like this. So if you want sharp corner, just increase this value right here and it's going to become sharp again. One last thing I want to go over is the sort points option, which is simply if I hold control and I click on this pink node, I can add another node. I can now move this node to the left or to the right, like that. And I can change the thickness of another area if I want to. It's pretty simple. If I have the sort points option turned off, and if I try to move this node like that, you get this weird kind of cutoff situation. If you do not want this, you turn this option on and you will not get this weird cutoff option or this weird cutoff. So that is basically what the sort points option does. So that is basically the full breakdown of the power stroke path effect, and let's move on to the next one. Alright, so the next path effect I'm going to discuss is the simplify path effect. To demonstrate that, let me make a simple stroke like that. With that selected, come over to the path effects menu and click on simplify. And already you can see what is done to it. The simplify path effect smoothens a path. That's really what it does. It will try to smoothen the path as much as it can. So we have these different options. If I increase the complexity, it will try to smoothen it as much as it can, like that. It will take the sharp corners right here and will try to smoothen it as much as it can. Repeats the entire process multiple times, and you can select how many times you want to do that. Smoothness obviously is quite obvious. If I reduce this, you can see I get the sharp corners back to normal, and if I increase it, I get the smoother corners. Handle size, to show the handle size, let's press N to get the nodes tool. And if I zoom in, as you can see these blue handles, right? You can see the blue handles. If I increase the size of these handles right here, they get bigger, and we can use these manually to control the shape of this path as well. If I take this handle and I move it, I can change the shape of it, and then we'll try to adjust and re-smooth try to smoothen the object anyways. So that's basically what that does. And paths separately just means that if you had a path, like an object with multiple different paths, you could affect all of those separately and edit all of those separately. But we don't have that, we have just a single path. So the most obvious application for this path effect that I can think of is if you want to draw lines in Inkscape and you want to smoothen the lines, then you can draw some rough lines and you can apply this path effect and it will smoothen the lines for you. And once you apply the path effect, you can come over to path, object to path, and then you can make some final touches and make some final, changes to it to make it even smoother. And so that right there is basically it for the simplify path effect. Let's move on to the next one. Alright, so the next path effect I want to discuss is the taper stroke path effect. To demonstrate that, let me press B to get the Bezier pen and let's make a stroke like that. And with that selected, come over to the path effects menu, click on taper stroke. And let me just zoom in about that much. And you get this menu with all of these different options, but it's very simple. I press N to get the nodes tool, and you can see these two nodes right here, these two diamond nodes. If I take one of these nodes, I can change the thickness of that area, and it will go right here from this point onwards all the way to the end point, and it will taper down to a single point. And that's basically what the taper stroke path effect does. It tapers up the the end and the starting point of a stroke all the way down to single point. Let's look at the menu. If I increase the stroke width, I can make the path thicker, like that. So the select subpath option right here is going to only apply if you have a different, if you have a single path with many different like subpaths. So in our case, we only have one path, so this is not, we can't really edit this or change this value. The start and end offset only change the position of this node right here. So if I increase this, it moves in that direction. If I reduce it, it moves like that. And if I come over to the end offset and I reduce that value, it does that same thing. Start smoothing and end smoothing is kind of interesting. Let me zoom in to show you what that does. So if I reduce the smoothing all the way to a negative value, let me move right here. If I move it to a negative value, that is what I get. I get this weird cutoff path. If I bring it all the way to 0, I get this situation where it's not very smooth, but it's okay. And if I increase it, it gets smoother and smoother. The transition between this point and the point where the width is completely 0 gets smoother and smoother and smoother and smoother. So that's basically what the start smoothing and end smoothing option does. The join type, let's come out to the join. The join type determines what kind of join you get. If you select bevel, you get that. If you want an extrapolated arc, if you have like a rounded path, you can select that. If you want a sharp point, like if you have straight edges and if you want a sharp point, select the miter option. And if you have a lot of curves and a smooth path, you can select rounded. But one more thing I will say right here is if you select miter and you don't actually see a sharp corner, let me bring this value down to 0. And if you get something like this, where you select miter but you don't get a sharp corner, increase the miter limit. And if you increase that, it will make it sharp again. And the only thing that is left now is the start direction and the end direction. And so let me zoom in right here. This is the end point. If I change the end direction to left, what it does is it tapers the stroke down all the way down to left of the initial position. And if I go ahead and select the right option, it tapers the stroke down to the right of the initial position. And if I select center, it will taper the stroke down right on the center. Okay, so the next path effect I'm going to discuss is the bend path effect, and it does exactly what it says. It bends an object along a path or a curve. So to begin, let me make a rectangle right here, or a square, or any other object. Let me come over to path and click on object path to turn that into a path object, and come over to the path effects menu and look for bend right here. And I'll press N to get the nodes tool, and I'll click right here, edit on canvas right here. This button will allow me to change to transform this object along a curve like that. And now I can take this line right here and I can bend this however I want. Right here, if I increase the width effect, right, this button right here, I can increase the width of this object. I can also do this manually right here using this diamond node. If I move this in, I can reduce its width and I can increase its width like that. This option right here does exactly what it says, width in units of length. This option right, I'm gonna uncheck that. The second option right here, origin path is vertical. If I click that, what that does is it takes if I make this value back to 1, as you can see, what that does is it takes the width of this object and makes the height of it the same as its width. Let me go ahead and delete this path effect and reapply it. Come out to path, object to path, and the path effect is now gone. Let me click on the bend path effect again, and let me click right there. And what that did was if I come over to the selector tool and I click on that object, as you can see the width and the height is now the same. So that's what the second option does, this one. And if I click right here, hide width knot, the width knot is now gone. I cannot change the width of this object manually. I can change it right here, but I cannot do it manually. I want to do it manually, I'm going to uncheck that, and I can now change the width of this object like that. And if I click on that, I can change I can bend it again. Okay, one more thing I want to show before I end this path effect, this one is a quick one, is if I click right here, actually no, I'm not even going to do that. I'm just going to delete this, and I'm going to press B to get the Bezier pen. I'll click on the B-spline path option, click right there to form that path, and I'm going to remove its stroke, give it a black fill color. I'll remove its fill and give that a black stroke like that. And let's just make it a little bit smaller, about that much. And now what I want to do is I want to select that, and I want to right click and copy that. Now it's copied to my clipboard, and I'm going to click on this object, come over to the path effects menu, click on bend. And with this path already linked to the clipboard, if I click right there, what it does is it links this object to this path. So if you copy a path to the clipboard, what you can do is you can bend different objects in the same exact around the same exact curve. And this can be useful if you want to bend multiple objects in the same around the same curve. And so that's basically the end for this path effect. Let's move on to the next one. The next path effect is the envelope deformation path effect. Let me make an object like that. Come over to a path, click on object to path to turn that into a path. Come over to the path effects menu and click on envelope deformation. And you'll see this menu right here. And right here you can see both of these options enable top and bottom paths and left and right paths. Both of these are checked. And I want these checked right now. If I click on this option right here, I have four options. I can bend top, right, bottom, or left. If I click on the top bend path and I zoom in, I see this green line. Hopefully you guys can see this green line. Hopefully you guys can see this line right here. But there's a green line right here, and I can use this green line to deform this object and uh, or at least deform the top part of this object right here, the top face of this object. If I click right here, it takes away that green line, and it gives me another line on the right side. And this right here allows me to deform this right side of this object, and it also deforms these areas right here as well. And and works the exact same way for the bottom bend path and the left bend path. So what is this useful for? This is useful for when you want to change the shape of an object into the shape of another object. And this is most commonly used for text when you want to change the shape of a text object and turn it into the shape of another object. This path effect is then used commonly for these types of things. Now right here you have these few options. You have a copy path option, you have a paste path option, and you have a link to clipboard option. These are going to work the exact same way as they did with the bend path effect. So you can copy this path right here, and then you can link any other object to the same path in the same way. So that's how you can do that. And with that said, this is a simple one, and that is basically it. I'm not going to demonstrate anything in more detail because that's going to make the video very long. But that's basically the rundown how this path effect actually works. You can use these different options to transform and bend this object and the different spaces of this object like that. The next path effect is the perspective path effect. To demonstrate this, I'm going to type a piece of text. Something like that. And I'll give that a black fill color. I'll remove the stroke. And I'll come over to path, click on object to path. Now we have converted the text object into a path. And with that, the text object is now a path. And with that selected, I'll come over to the path effects menu, click on perspective/envelope. And once I've applied that, I can press N to get the nodes tool. I can use these 4 corner nodes, these diamond shaped corner nodes, to add perspective to this object like that. Let me Control Z that. If you select this option, mirror movements in horizontal, it will mirror the movements on the horizontal axis. And if you do the same thing in the vertical axis, it does the same thing on the vertical axis, where it mirrors the movements on the vertical axis to give that look. If you change the type to envelope deformation, it produces a slightly different results, and this is more useful potentially for placing this object on top of a plane. We can also use these values right here for these handles and manually change their positioning. Not very useful, but that option is also available. Lastly, I will say one thing with this overflow option right here, overflow perspective. I never notice any difference. So if you guys know what this does, let me know in the comments. And let's move on to the next one. The next path effect I will discuss is the roughen path effect, and it does exactly what it says. It makes an object rough looking. Let me make an object like that. I'll turn that into a path, come over to the path effects menu and click on roughen. And as you can see already, it's applied the path effect. Let me scale this up a little bit. We can better see this. And you get this menu, and we'll go through each option one by one to see what they do. The first option right here, the global randomize option, increases the roughness in all directions equally. So it displaces the nodes that will be applied to the object once we finalize this path effect. It basically increases the displacement of all of those nodes. If you increase this value right here, so let me just actually raise this value to showcase how that works. As you can see, it is making that rough looking. If I increase this value right here, it displays on the this will displace the object more, or the nodes more on the horizontal axis. So if I do that, as you can see, that's what happens. If I increase this bottom option right here, displace on the vertical axis, it will displace the nodes more on the vertical axis, right, like that. Right there under the resolution heading, you have this method, and you can select either segment size or number of segments. If you select number of segments, then right here from the number of segments option, you can increase the number of segments and it will make the object rough looking accordingly. But if you increase the segment size while this selected, nothing will change. If you change this option to segment size, then everything now depends on the segment size, and if I increase that, it will make the object rough accordingly. And this option right here then does nothing. So that's basically what that does. You can select either one and do it based on whichever one you feel is better for you. So anyways, if I make this value smaller, obviously segments become smaller and they look more rough. And if I increase it, it does the exact opposite. Finally, if you uncheck this option right here, the apply displacement option, it will give you the original object. And if you check it, it gives you those displacements applied. Now, if you click on the fixed displacement option, it applies a fixed displacement value. And if you click on the spray tool friendly, this right here will be useful when you want to randomly create like a realistic spray effect with the spray tool. So that can be used for that. And so that's basically it for this path effect. That's basically the entire breakdown. That's what that does, and that is how it works. The next path effect I'll go over is the pattern along path effect. And to demonstrate that, I'll click on the circles tool and I'll make a perfectly round circle like that. And now I'll duplicate that and make a much bigger circle like that. Maybe I'll make it a little bit smaller like that. And with that bigger circle selected, come over to path, click on object to path, and come over to the path effects menu and click on pattern along path. And before I do anything and click on this object, I'll right click and copy that, come back over to this other object and I'll click right here, link to path in clipboard. And that is what it does. it stretches this object along the perimeter of that path. So if I change this option from the drop down and I change it to repeated stretched, it gives me something like that. If I change it to single, it gives me that. If I change it to repeated, it gives me something similar to that. So let me just go back to repeated stretch because I think that's the most relevant one and produces the best results. If I increase the width, it increases the width like that. If I increase the spacing, it will reduce the number of objects that it can place in that length, and it will increase the spacing by 1. If I increase the normal offset, it does something similar to that, and if I decrease it, so if I go to a negative value, it will do something like that. And I can also increase the tangential offset, and let me just go to a much bigger value to show what that does, and increase the spacing right here, like that. You also have a few more options right here, offsets in unit of pattern size, and that gives you some weird results like that. We don't really need to worry about that. Pattern is vertical, will produce no results in this case because the object I'm using is a circle, so it's not going to produce any difference. Hide width knot, what that does is if I press N to get the nodes tool and I uncheck that, I can see this width knot right here, and if I move this, I can make changes to this object like that. If I hide that, I cannot make changes to it. This is useful if you want to not make any mistakes on the canvas. As you're moving around the object, you don't want to make any mistakes. You don't want to play around with it. You want to use fixed values right here. Then it's useful to hide this value right here. Fuse nearby ends value. If I increase this value, what it will do is it will connect these two areas of the nearby objects. Let's go to like a really big value with like something like 25. Maybe let's go to like 50. And as you can see, it just fuses those ends like that, which we do not want. So that right there for the most part is basically how the pattern along path effect works. Before I move on to the next one, I want to just show a few ways where you can use this path effect to your advantage. I'm going to click on the rectangle tool and I'm going to make a rectangle or a square like that. I'll also make a circle. I'll click on this object and I will turn this into that orientation. Maybe I'll do a little bit of that. I'll click on this object now and I'll come over to path, do that, and come back over to the pattern along path effect. I'll click on this object, right click and copy, click right here and link to clipboard like that. And now from this menu, I can select repeated stretched and it gives me an interesting looking shape like that. Now I can play around with this however I want. One thing you guys have to know as well that I missed before is that if I change the orientation and the size of this object, it will change this path in real time like that. So this is something useful that I can also use right here. Also, I can rotate this object like that, and it will rotate all of these copies linked to this object. Let me press Ctrl Z. I don't want to do that. So let's just say you found this object right here and you want to finalize it. With that selected, you'll come over to Path and click on Object to Path, and it will delete the path effect and it will take away the path effect menu. And now this object is not linked to this object anymore. So you can click on that and you can delete that. Let me press Ctrl D on this object and I'll hold Ctrl and Shift and scale this down. And let me zoom in. No, we click that and zoom in. Right about there is where I want that. And I will click on the center object right here and I'll press Ctrl D and I'll hold Ctrl and Shift and scale this down. About that much. And you can use this path effect to create interesting looking shapes like this one right here. So that's basically it for the pattern along path effect. And let's move on to the next one. Okay, so the next path effect I'm going to discuss is the transform by 2 points path effect. To do that, let me make a object like that. and I'm not going to convert this object into a path. I'll come over to the Path Effects menu and click on the Transform by 2 points path effect. And if I press N to get the nodes tool, I can use these two diamond shaped nodes to transform this object like that. I can use this one to change its dimensions, and I can use this one to change its rotation angle like that. Okay, right here it says first node and last node, and that just refers to this node and this node. The helper size will come back to that. If I increase the stretch value, it just increases the height right there, or the dimension that is perpendicular to this blue line. If I reduce this, it reduces the length or the dimension that is perpendicular to this blue line. If I increase the offset, it just moves it in one or the other direction. That's all it does. The start and end points are just the coordinates for these two start and end nodes. So if I change this value right here to a greater value, it will move that node to the right. And if I reduce it, it will move this node to the left. And if I increase the y value, it moves this node. It actually lowered that. And if I reduce it, it should raise it up like that. Okay, so these are the most interesting options of this tool. If I click right there on elastic and I move this point, I can stretch the object like that. If I uncheck that, I cannot stretch the object. I can only increase its dimension proportionally. I can't just increase one of the dimensions on its own. But if I check that, I can now stretch it like that. And I can also stretch the object from this option right here as well. But this option will stretch it perpendicular to the blue line, and this one I can do it manually along the blue line like that. Whereas if I increase this value, it does it perpendicular to the blue line, not along the blue line. So that's the difference between these two options. Let me uncheck that. And actually, let me just check that. Why not? So right here, if I click on flip vertical, it's not going to make a difference. And that's simply because the object, this tool right here, flips the object vertically about this blue line. So if you flip this object about this blue line right here, it's not going to look any different. And if you do that same exact thing on the horizontal axis, it's not going to make a difference because it's going to look the same since it's a symmetrical path like that. Now, if this object wasn't symmetrical, this will make a difference. But so that's basically all that does. It doesn't flip it vertically, globally. It flips it vertically, but along this or about this line. So just keep that in mind. If I click on lock length, it will lock the length of the shape, and I can only now rotate this. As you can see, I cannot change the length of the object, but I can rotate it like that. But I cannot change it now. Now, one thing I can do right here is I can increase the helper size. Let me zoom in. You can see this blue circle right here. This is known as helper, and it basically helps us rotate this object around this point. It is just basically an indication for you to know what point you can rotate around which one. So that's basically all that is. And you can do the exact opposite thing where you can lock the angle. And now you cannot rotate the object, but you can change the length of it like that. And so that right there is basically the full breakdown of the transform by 2 points path effect. Alright, with that said, let's move on to the next one. Okay, the next path effect I'm going to discuss is the lattice deformation path effect. To do that, I'm going to make a rectangle like that and come over to the path, click on object path. And with that selected, come over to the path effects menu, click on lattice deformation and press N to get the nodes tool. And what you get is a grid of 5 by 5 diamond shaped nodes. And what these allow you to do is deform this object using these different nodes. So I can use these nodes to deform the different faces of this object and even the these areas right here. And that's basically what this path effect does. So let's go through some of these settings right here that are available to us. If I click on reset grid, any changes I've made to the object are completely reset and we can start again from zero. This is useful if you made some changes and you don't really like the shape and you want to go and start from scratch again. You can click right here to reset everything back to the original shape. If you click on mirror movements on the horizontal axis, what it will do is if you move this node, it's going to mirror the opposite node in the opposite direction. This will apply to this node as well, but this will not apply to the center node or the center line of nodes. And this will be true for both the horizontal nodes as well as for the vertical ones. So that's basically what that does. If I do the same thing, let me reset that. If I do the same thing but for the vertical axis, the same exact thing, but now it is mirrored in the vertical axis. Let me undo that. And now I can also let me reset the grid. I can also check this option, use only perimeter, and it just gets rid of the internal nodes right here. And now I can only use the external nodes. So these can be useful. This right here can be useful for text if you want to warp text. Let me uncheck that. So update while moving nodes, this is by default always going to be checked on. And really, if I uncheck that and I move this node, I can't see the change right here. If I place it right here and let it go, it will now finalize that, show me the final result like that. You always want to keep this turned on because you want to be able to see what you're actually doing. So this path effect is useful if you want to make simple smooth deformations to objects, specifically text objects. To use this path effect with your object selected, come over to the Path Effects menu and click on Bolean Operation. And right here, what you want is you want two different objects to be able to apply this path effect. I'll click right there on the rectangle tool and I'll make another rectangle like that, or a square. And let's give it a different color as well, something like green is fine in this case. I'm going to right click on this shape and copy it, and then I click on my black object right here. And what I can do now is with this object selected, I can click on this button right here, link to item, and by default the operation is set to union, so it unionizes both of those objects like that. Now this is just one object. Now I can move it around as a single path. If I want to finalize it, I can come over to path and click on object to path and it will finalize this function. We don't want to do that. We can also cycle through all these different options right here. One thing that is interesting that if you select from the operation, if you select difference and you click right here on the swap operands, it gives you a little bit of a different result right here. So this is something that you can also play around with. Finally, if you change these two menus, these two drop downs right here, fill type this and fill type operand, if you change these, they give you slightly different results for depending on the path operation you've selected. I feel for the most part these are pretty much useless because every result that we get from using these, we can already get by changing the operation right here. So for the most part, keeping these on the default is going to be probably the best idea. So what is the advantage to using these over the path functions? The only advantage this path effect gives you over the normal path operations is that if you apply a path operation right here, you can change it non-destructively, versus with the path operations, the default path operations in Inkscape, you cannot change the path operation like that. You're gonna have to undo it and then redo a different one. The next path effect I'll discuss is the clone original path effect. And with my object selected right here, I'm going to press Ctrl D and duplicate that and place it this one right here. Actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make a circle. Now I have two different objects right here. I'm going to click on the rectangle or the square and right click and copy that to the clipboard. I'll click on the circle, and with that selected, I'll come over to path and click on object to path, turn that into a path object. And now I'll come over to the path effects menu and I'll click on the clone original path effect. And with this selected, you'll click right here on link to item. Let me zoom out. And as you can see, the shape of the original object or the copied object is already applied to the to our path right here. Let me just scale this down. I'm going to take this object, place it right here. If I click right there and press N to get the nodes tool, obviously this is not a path of the object, but if I make changes to its shape, those changes will automatically be applied to this object as well. Know that if you try to deform this object using the selector tool, those changes are not applied. Only the changes you make using the nodes tool are applied. Just keep that in mind. One really big advantage you get using this path effect is that if I try to change the color of this clone, I can easily do that without affecting the color of the original object. This is one advantage you get over the traditional or normal default clone function inside of Inkscape. If I make a circle right here and I give it a red color and I come over to edit and I create a clone, I go into clone, create clone. I take the clone and I can place it right here. If I try to change the color of the clone to some other color, I am not able to do so. I have to change the color of the original object to change the color of the clone. This is something you do not have to do with the clone path effect. You can change the color of the cloned object irrespective of the original object. The next path effect is the fill between many path effect. To use this, I'm going to press B to get the Bezier pen. I'll click right there, click and drag right there to form a shape like that. I'll remove its fill color and I'll add a stroke. And let's increase the stroke width. And now I'm going to duplicate that. Place it right here, flip it on the horizontal and the vertical axis like that. I'll click right there and shift click on that object and press Ctrl G and duplicate them. And now I'll make a rectangle like that. And I'll give that a fill color and I'll remove its stroke. I'll click right there on this shape and I'll right click and copy that. And I'll click on this rectangle or the square. And I'll come over to path, click on object to path and come over to the path effects menu and apply the fill between many path effect. And if I click on this button right here, it's going to apply that fill to the copied path in the clipboard. If I move this shape around, the clipboard path follows it around the canvas. Right here you can check or uncheck these options for these different results. And you can also remove a path. You can select it and remove it like that. Let me press Ctrl Z to undo that. Right here, if you select with all LBEs, it's going to pretty much apply this path effect to all the subpaths that have a live path effect already applied to them. If you select with Spiro or B-spline, it's only going to apply it to Spiro or B-spline path. And without LBEs, it's going to only apply it to paths or subpaths that do not have a live path effect already applied. If you uncheck the join subpaths option, it's going to give you a result like this one. And if you uncheck this and this right here, it's going to produce slightly different results. But in our case, it's not going to produce any results because it depends on the shape or the subpaths that you're trying to join together. If I press N to get the nodes tool, I can also change the shape of the path that I've copied to the clipboard. And the path effect will automatically be applied to it. That since the object we used to apply the fill color is already linked to the path in the clipboard. The next path effect I'm going to discuss is the hedges path effect. To do that, I'm going to click and make simple shape like that. I'll give that a black fill color like that. And from the path effects menu, I'll click on hedges. And that's the result I get. And from this menu right here, you see a lot of different options, but all of these options control the smoothness and the size and the stroke width of this stroke right here. And that's basically just it. The randomness does exactly what it says. if I make this value much smaller, it's going to give me a little bit of a different result. I can also click on this cube right here, which is going to give me a different result every single time. It's going to just scroll through, cycle between different options, and randomly generate slightly different results. The growth option generally makes the hatches or these strokes much bigger. So if I keep increasing this number, I'm going to have much fewer of these different waves right here, as you can see. The bend hatches option controls what type of shape the hatches actually have. I can use all of these different options to change the shape of these hatches, and I can control their different positions as well. And so let's go through some of these. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll play with a few of them just to show what these actually do. They all work very similarly, so that should make things very clear. This right here, random bottom in the vertical axis, is going to take the bottom side of this hatch and going to either move it up or down randomly based on the number we enter right here. If I enter a number, it changed the bottom right here. Now you can apply a number right here, or you can use this cube right here to generate a completely random number and just cycle through to get different results. If you increase this number right here, it's going to cycle through much bigger values. And we go to a value of 500, let's say. So now the variation between these is going to be much bigger. If I use this option, this cube right here, it's going to give me different variations like that are all completely random. You can do the same exact thing for the top option. If I double click right there, select that, and I change that to something really big like 300, and I click right here, it's going to randomly generate different sequences right there. You can do the same exact thing for the horizontal direction, for the bottom as well as for the top. The smooth bottom and the top controls the smoothness of this right here. If I take this value and make it 0, it's going to take the bottom corners, as you can see, and make them really, really sharp. I can do the same thing for this one. As you can see, that's the result it gives me. Like that. I can do the same thing right here at the top as well. If I come over to the top and make this value 0, as you can see, it makes this side sharp, and if I click right there and make that value 0, it's going to make that really sharp. And so that's basically what this menu does right here. If I come over to the vary stroke width menu, what this does is it changes the stroke of the different hatches. If I increase the width, obviously the width of these different lines will increase. So let me make this a really big value, like 50, and you can see the bottom edges right here, the bottom sides become really, really thick. I can do the same thing for the this one right here. Let's make that like 30. It's going to make the top right there much thicker. And you can do the same thing right here for the horizontal. Right here, let's make it a little bit smaller value, like 20. And so you get the point of how to use these different menus and create different edges using this path effect. One last thing I want to showcase right here is if you have a piece of text or any other object, you can manually adjust the hatches. To do that, come over to the path effects menu. Let's apply the path effect. And I'll press N to get the nodes tool. I won't mess up these settings. I'll just do it manually. So you have let me zoom in. You have 4 nodes. These 2 green nodes, as well as these 2 yellow nodes as well. So we can use this right here, the 2 nodes on the right, the yellow node on the right and the green node on the right, to adjust the density as well as the angle of the hatch. So if I use the green node, I can increase the density of the hatch like that. And I can use the yellow node to change the angle. And with that, you have completed your sketch effect. And so that is basically it. Now, if you want more fine tuning, you can use these settings to fine tune these effects more, but that is basically how the hatches path effect works. The next path effect is the Interpolate Sub Paths path effect. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to use these two shapes. I'll click right there and shift click on this one. With them both selected, I'll come over to path, click on object to path, and combine. With this path selected, I'll come over to the path effects menu and then click on the Interpolate Sub Paths path effect. And as you can see, this is the result it gives us. From the menu, we want to select equidistant spacing because that's going to ensure that the spacing between each object is the same, which is what we want. The number of steps determine how many new shapes are created between the two original shapes. And one thing you can also do is if you click on right here on this button right here, it's going to allow you to change the trajectory of the created path, which is very useful for this type of thing. This path effect works very closely and similarly to the interpolated extension. Although I do prefer the extension, this option is still available if you want to use it. The next path effect I'll discuss is the mirror symmetry path effect. This is one of the most powerful path effects in Inkscape, and it's one of my favorites. So to do that, I'm going to make a square like that. I'll come over to path, click on object to path. You don't have to do this because you can apply this to a shape as well. But for my demonstration, I'm going to use a path. I'll come over to the path effects menu and click on mirror symmetry. And as you can see, what that did is created a copy of that and mirrored it on the vertical axis. If I press N to get the nodes tool, I can use this diamond node to control its positioning like that. From the presets right here, I can select what type of mirror symmetry I'm looking for. So if I select the mirror free defined mirror line, which is the default, I can control the positioning of my mirror line on the horizontal axis. If I change this to horizontal page center, if you select this option, you're not going to be able to move this mirror line freely. If you select the vertical page center, you cannot move the mirror line freely, but it locks it onto the vertical page center. And you can also select one of these options as well. So let me undo that and let me set this to freely defined mirror line. There's a few options right here as well that we can discuss. From these options right here, if you select discard original path, it will get rid of the original path, but that's not really what we're looking for usually. I'm going to uncheck that. The fuse paths options fuses the two paths together, and instead of getting a cutoff like we will right here, as you can see, if I click on the fuse paths option, now if I move this mirror line, it just fuses the two paths together like that. The fuse opposite sides give the same result as the default. So if I try to move this in, give the same result. Split elements splits the two elements apart, and now you can edit them separately. And link styles just makes it so that the new copy takes on the colors of the original. So if I click on the original and change the color, it's going to be applied automatically to the new element as well. One more thing I want to go over is the vertical center as well as the horizontal center options. If I want to switch from the horizontal axis to the vertical axis, I can click right here on the horizontal center button, and I can click on this diamond shape and move it down, and it's going to switch that movement from the vertical axis to the horizontal axis like that. If I want to go back, I can click on the vertical center option and click on this diamond shape node and drag it to the right or to the left, and it's going to switch automatically to the other one. The next path effect is the power clip path effect. To use this path effect, we need an already clipped object on our canvas. To do that, I'm going to make a rectangle or a square like that, and I'm going to make a circle as well, like that. And I'll give the circle a different color, and I'll place it on top of the square. With that selected, I'll shift click on the square, right click, and set clip. And now we've clipped the square into the shape of a circle. With that selected, I'll come over to the path effects menu, click on power clip, and by default it will inverse the clipping. If you uncheck that, it gives you that initial result. If you select that, you get that result. If you hide clip, you just are simply hiding the clip. You can't see the clipping anymore. And the only one interesting option here is the flatten clip option. And what this does is, to demonstrate this option, I'm going to have to come over to Path, click on Object to Path, and the clipping is now gone, the path effect is now gone. I'll right click on this object, I'll come over and click on Release Clip. And instead of giving me a circle and a square, it gives me two copies of this object in those two colors. So that's what the flatten clip option does. It takes whatever you see on your screen and turns that into an object. And with that said, that's it for this path effect. The next path effect I'm going to go over is the power mask path effect. And before I apply the path effect, I'm going to explain what a mask is and how it actually works. So I'll make a rectangle like that, and I'll give that a color like that. And I'll make a circle. Let me give that a white fill color for now. And I'll give the circle a linear gradient going from white to black, like that. So the way a mask actually works is the area that is white will have zero transparency. The area that is black will have full transparency, and the areas that are gray will have partial transparency. And let's actually do that to see what that looks like. So with them both selected, right click and set mask. As you can see, the areas that were white are fully visible. They don't have any transparency to them. The areas that were fully black are completely see-through. They have they're fully transparent. And the areas that were gray are partially opaque and partially transparent. So you can see through them somewhat. So now with this object selected, I'll come over to the Path Effects menu and I'll click on Power Mask. And I have three options, just like Power Clip. If I click on Invert Mask, it just changes the direction. If I hide mask, that's what that does. And if I add background to mask, that's the result I get. And that is really all this path effect does. So it's not the most practical one, but if you want to use it, it's available right there. With that said, let's move on to the next one. The next path effect I'll go over is the rotate copies path effect, and this is easily one of the most powerful path effects in Inkscape. And so to use this, just make a simple shape. I'm just going to use this simple shape. I'll come over to the path effects menu and click on rotate copies. And as you can see, it's already applied, and this is the result we get with these settings. But let's just go over the settings to see what we can do with this. The first thing right here is the method. If you change the method, you get a slightly different result every single time. The most interesting method here easily is the normal method, and I'll go over what I mean by that in a second. Right here you can increase the number of copies, and that's what you get when you do that. The starting angle will change the starting angle, and so let me just take this to like 45, and that's just going to simply shift and rotate the copies a little bit when you do that. The rotation angle basically doesn't make any difference. If you increase the rotation angle, it will basically produce no change. Let me go to a rotation angle of 300. It makes simply no change, but what I will say one thing is if I delete this path effect and I reapply it, the rotation angle is set back to the correct value. But if I try to change it now, it won't make a difference. So the rotation angle is determined by the number of copies right here. So the number of copies and the rotation angle do the same thing, but this doesn't make a difference. This actually does. The gap option right here is simply used if you want to reduce the gap between any two elements that are not close enough and you want to like eliminate any weird space between them. You can use like a negative value or something like that to minimize any empty spaces. That's where you can use the gap option right here. Right here, these are the most interesting options of this tool or this path effect. If I click on distribute evenly, all that means is that it's going to distribute the copies with an even distance between them. If I click on mirror copies, it gives you a very complex looking shape, and this is what you can use to create mandala designs or similar things like that, and I'll go over that in a second. Split elements just splits each element into a separate object like that. I'm going to uncheck that. Link styles just means that the stylistic elements like the colors and other elements are going to be the same between all of the elements. Finally, I want to go over how you can use this path effect to make some interesting designs. So I'm going to just click right here to turn off the path effect for a second. And we can see that this is the rectangle, the original rectangle that we have. These are the two nodes of the rectangle. And this right here, the circular node that allows us to change the rectangle from a capsule shape to a sharp-edged rectangle, like that. Now, if I turn this path effect back on, I get this result. What I can now do is I can take this circle and pull it down, and that will, in real time, change the shape that I get right here as well. This is the node of the rectangle, and right here, this is the other node. And I can use these also to create very interesting looking shapes and designs using the rectangle. So if I just pull this node out like that, so you can see the results I get are quite interesting. And this is just from a simple shape like a rectangle. So anyways, you can make interesting looking mandala designs using this path effect. It's definitely one of the most interesting and powerful path effect inside of Inkscape. And with that said, I'll move on to the next one. The next path effect is the sketch path effect. To use this, I'm going to press T and write a word. And we're going to give this word a sketch effect. To do that, I'll come to Path, click on Object to Path, and I'll come out to the Path Effects menu and click on Sketch. And it's obviously messed up. I'm just going to take this menu and bring it out like that. And we can now play around with all of these settings to bring this to a point where this looks like a realistic sketch. I'll come over and I'll remove its fill. And then I'll come over to Fill and Stroke menu and I'll give that a very thin stroke. A very, very thin stroke. So I'll give it a stroke and I'll give it's a very thin stroke, like about 0.2 for me is working well. Now I'll come out to Path Effects menu and we'll fix these settings to see how we can use this. Right here from the strokes setting right here, you can increase the number of strokes you want. And this will give you a thicker or a thinner looking result. I'll choose a value of about 5. Offset just basically takes some of these copies and offsets them from their current position. We actually want this value to be quite low, about 2. Stroke length max basically controls the length of each stroke. If I zoom in, as you can see, this is 1 stroke right here. If I make this value smaller, it's going to make the strokes a little bit shorter. I'm just going to give this a value of about there. The overlap max actually controls the overlap, which just means that how much the strokes actually overlap each other. So this will right here control the overlap value as well. And right here from the overlap setting, you can actually randomly choose a different value, slightly different value based on the number you have here. If you increase the number, it's going to variate between much bigger variations. If you reduce this value, it's going to make much smaller variations. That's basically what that does. As I reduce the add extra lines number, it takes away the weird, long, lengthy lines right here. So I will keep this at 0, so to get rid of all of those lines. Length max is something that only makes a difference if you actually have the scale option set to a value greater than 0. So if I select the scale option and slide it all the way to 0, length max does nothing. If I increase the scale value to a value greater than 0, I can now change the length of these lines using this slider. I would say keeping these at 0 is probably the best idea. And once you are happy with the result, you can also, by the way, turn this off anytime you want. Look at your original text, turn it back on. You can also make changes to this. I can reduce the stroke width, come back over to the Path Effects menu, and apply it like that, and I think this one looks much better. So that is basically how you can convert your text into a sketch using the sketch path effect. The next path effect is the slice path effect, and this is one of the simplest path effects in Inkscape. With an object selected, come over to the path effects menu and click on slice. And by default, it's going to divide the object you have into two equal parts like this. It's just going to take the object and make a line, vertical line right between the middle, like that. Let me uncheck this option right here, allow transforms option. And if I click on horizontal and I click right here, again, it will convert that into a horizontal slice like that. You can also change these numbers right here to adjust where the object is cut. And we can also press N to get the nodes tool. And we can manually control this center node right here and place it exactly where we want to place it. And the slice effect will be applied right exactly on that location. If you use these nodes right here, then you can cut a path on a sideways angle like that. Know that this right here is the bounding box, and the blue line is where the object is going to be cut. So don't be confused with the bounding box. Pay attention to the blue line, that's where the object will be cut. So you can also cut the object at an angle like that. If you want to switch back to the vertical orientation, you can just click right here on allow transforms, click on vertical, and then re-click right here. It will convert it back into a vertical orientation. And so with that, this is basically it. This is a very simple path effect, but it's quite useful. The next path effect is the Stich Sub Paths path effect, and we can use this path effect to make wire mesh type designs. And to explain what I mean, I'll make a simple polygon like that, and I'll remove its fill color and give it a thin stroke. Of about that much. And then I'll press Ctrl D, hold Ctrl and Shift, and scale this object down. And you want to make sure that you uncheck this option right here. When scaling objects, scale the stroke width by the same proportion. You want this unchecked so that the stroke of the smaller copy and the bigger one are the same. And maybe I'll make this a little bit smaller. And now I'll click right there, select the smaller copy, shift click on the bigger one. With them both selected, come over to path, click on object to path, and then I'll come over to path and click on combine. Combine them into one single path. And now I'll come over to the path effects menu and click on Stich Sub Paths. And right here, the number of paths are only 5 right now. So this looks like a weird looking thing. But if I increase the number of paths, you begin getting something very interesting. And you can keep increasing this number to as much as I want. And the best way to explain this path effect is by manually editing the path. To do that, come over, click on this button right here, edit on canvas, and this will give you this diamond shaped node. And if you move it around, you can change the shape of this object like that. As you can see, we can make something really, really interesting by using this path effect. Let me zoom in. You can also just take this green line and bend it to get more interesting types of results using this. Like that. Let's also quickly go over these options right here. If you increase the start edge variance value, what it does is it changes the gaps between the different paths and makes them uneven, like that. So I will take this value back to 0. And start spacing variance again does something similar. like that. I'll take this value back to 0. And end edge variance and end spacing variance do the exact same thing, but except that they do this to the end edges right here versus the start edges. So let me just go ahead and give this a value. As you can see, it destroys the edges right there. So we pretty much want all of these values to be on 0. We also have the scale width relative to length option. If I check this, it gives a slightly different result. And if I increase this value, I can change the type of result I get right here. So for the most part, you want to keep all of these values at 0. And then you want to play around manually on the canvas. You want to edit these nodes right here to get different types of cool looking results like that. Anyways, that is it for this path effect. Let's move on to the next one. The next path effect I'll go over is the tiling path effect. And to showcase that, I'll make a triangle, because I think the triangle explains this path effect better than any other shape. So I'll hold Control, make a triangle like that. And with that selected, we'll come over to the path effects menu and click on tiling. And as you can see, that is what the tiling path effect does. It creates an array of rows and columns using the original shape you used. Okay, let's just go over the menu real quick. If I increase the number of rows, I can increase the number of rows. I can also change the number of columns. I can decrease them like that. I can increase the gaps right here. Let me give that a value of like 10 or something a little bigger than that, 50, like that. And I can increase the gaps in the y-axis as well. And that's what that does. Offset will increase the positioning on the horizontal or the vertical axis like that. We'll bring this back to 0. Scale makes the object bigger or smaller like that. And depending on the method you've used right here, it's going to scale them slightly differently. If you want to scale all of them uniformly, you can just select this option. If you want to scale them randomly, you can select that one, and you have all of these different options. Rotation does the exact same thing, but for rotation, I'm not going to go over that. I'll quickly go over these options as well. These are quite useful. If I click on split elements, it will split the elements apart like that. If I take the original and change the size or the orientation, everything else, all the other copies will follow it like that. Let me uncheck that. If I link styles, it just ensures that if you change the split elements, if I click on the original copy and I change the color, all the other copies take the same color from the original. If I don't do that, and if I change the color of the original, the copies don't match the same color. That's what that does. Okay, so minimize gaps will minimize the gaps between the elements. Now, it doesn't work for rotated objects like this one. So it doesn't really work right here. I'm going to uncheck it, but it's supposed to minimize gaps. However, it is very object specific. So it depends on the shape of the object you're using. Mirror transforms is very, very useful. It makes sure that the transforms or the array of objects is uniform. And so with that selected, if you come over to the mirroring mode and change the mirroring mode, you'll get different types of patterns like this. So anyways, you can use these to create different types of patterns, and I think this path effect right here is most useful to create interesting patterns using simple shapes. And with that said, I think that's more or less it. The next path effect is the koch path effect. And what this path effect does is it creates extensions for an object in the shape of that object. and I'll demonstrate that in a second right now. With that selected, come over to the Path Effects menu, click on one koch. You can see it created two extensions for this object, and they have the same shape as the original object. We can edit both of these objects on the canvas right here. If I click right here on the reference segment, I can edit the original object. So if I click right there, it will allow me to use this green line in these two nodes to change the overall kind of orientation and shape of the two extensions. And what I can also do is I can click on this one, and now I get two more of these green lines for each segment, and I can manually adjust each one independent of the other one, like that. You can also bend these lines, but that doesn't really do anything. So yeah, we can also use the number of generations option right here to increase the number of generations like that. If I zoom in, you can see it's doing the same thing over and over again, just repeating the same pattern. If I drop the max complexity number to a smaller number like that, I won't be able to see the changes. To be able to have the changes take effect, you'll have to increase this value to a much bigger value, and then you can see those changes. And so that's basically what this path effect does. With that said, let's move on to the next one. The next path effect is the attach path effect. And so to demonstrate this, I'm going to create a quick path like this using the Bezier pen. And I'll duplicate that, flip it on the vertical axis or the horizontal axis. And then I'll take one of these, right click on it, copy that, and select on the other one and apply the path effect to it. So with this select, I'll come over to the path effect menu, click on attach path. And you have two parts of this menu. You have a start path area right here, and you have the end path menu right here. Depending on which of these options you click right here, you're going to get a slightly different generation like that. I'm just going to go over one of these options, one of these menus right here. The other one is the exact same thing, but for the end path. So I'll begin right here with the start path position. If I increase this, you see what's that doing. If I bring it back to 0, it's going to bring it back to its original position. If I zoom in right here, you can see the line is not fully straight, it's curved. If I click right here in this value and make it 0, you can see the line on this end becomes a fully straight line like that. So that's what the start path curve start does right here. I can change the angle and the distance right here, and I can also change the angle on the end right here. If I make this value 0, it gives me a fully straight line like that. If I press N to get the nodes tool, I can manually change the shapes of the two generated paths. Let me get this out of the way, and I can use this node right here to change the shape of the generated path like that. However, there is quite a limitation to using it manually, since it gives you a lot more control over the curve end versus the curve start. So if you want to control the curve start, you're going to have to manually type these values right here. And in general, it doesn't seem like the most useful path effect, since you can do all of this easily using the nodes tool, and possibly even better. So seems like a redundant path effect. But if you want to use it, it is there, it is available, and that is how you use it. The next path effect is the bounding box path effect, and to demonstrate how this one works, let me press B to get the Bezier pen, click right there, and I'll make a random path like that. And to use this path effect, I'll have to make one more shape, so I'll make a rectangle, and let's give the rectangle a different color, something like that. I'll click right there on this shape right here, and I'll right click, copy it to the clipboard, and I'll click on this shape, and with that selected, I'll come over to the path effects menu and click on bounding box. And the only option I get right here is this option right here, link to item. If I click on that, it links the object to that item. And let me lower that to the bottom, and you can see what that does. If you want to change the shape of the original object, those changes will automatically be reflected on the bounding box. And if you press N to get the nodes tool and change the shape of the original object, you will see those changes reflected on the bounding box as well. Not sure how useful this path effect actually is, but if you want to use it, that's how you can use it. The next path effect I'll cover is the dashed stroke path effect, and what it does is it takes the stroke of an object and turns it into a dashed stroke. So with your object selected, come over to the path effects menu and click on dash stroke, and there you go, that's what that does. We can increase the number of dashes right here, like that. We can increase or decrease the size of the holes using this option right here. If you uncheck the use segments option, it makes the dashes not uniform anymore. If you want the dashes to be uniform throughout the object and mirrored, you check this option and will be mirrored and uniform. This option right here makes it that the dashes on the corners right here, well, let me just do this. If I uncheck that, it doubles the size of the dashes on the corners. If I check that, it decreases that length right there to half, like that. Equalize dashes makes sure that the dashes length between on the shorter length and the longer length are the same. So if you look at the dashes right here, they are much longer versus these ones. If I check this option right here, the dashes will be normalized to the same length. And that's it for this path effect. The ellipse by 5 points path effect makes an ellipse from 5 points. To demonstrate what I mean by this, let me press B to get the Bezier pen, and I'm going to make a path with 5 nodes. So click right there. Let me go to the default mode and try again. And click right there and make 5 different points. There's 4. Actually, there's 5 points right there. So I'm just going to finalize it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And with that selected, I'll come over to the Path Effects menu and click on Ellipse by 5 points. And what that did was it took the 5 points, the 5 nodes of this object, and turned that into an ellipse. And now we can use these points to edit the ellipse as much and how we want. And that is basically all this path effect does. There's no options, and you just use the nodes right here to change the shape of the ellipse, and that's it. The ellipse by points path effect is the same thing as the ellipse by 5 points path effect, but this time you can use as many points as you want. You can use 2 points, you can just use 2 nodes, or you can use more than 2 nodes to do it. I'm just going to go with 4 nodes right here. And I'm just going to click right here on ellipse from points, and it's going to create an ellipse. From the method right here, you can change the options to make it so that it's going to give you slightly different results. And let's just go through all of them one by one. The first option you have is the auto ellipse option. Second one is the force circle, which I think it's pretty clear what that means. It will make it so that the points will form into a circle. You have the isometric circle option, as well as perspective circle option. And right here you can use the nodes that are available to you to give this ellipse a perspective. Useful for placing the ellipse on top of some other object, on top of a plane. Standard ellipse option makes it so that you create an ellipse using the 3 nodes. The 4th node is just left doing nothing. We use these 3 nodes to edit the ellipse. And then the last option, standard in ellipse, does the same thing, but this time the ellipse is inscribed between the 3 nodes like that. Versus the Steiner ellipse option, the ellipse is actually crossing the 3 nodes. Right here, the ellipse is inscribed between the 3 nodes. And that's it. Let's go through some of these options as well. With auto ellipse selected, I'll come over and click on arc. And what that does is it turns the ellipse into an arc. Like that. If you click on other side arc, it just gives you the other side arc. Let me uncheck that. Slice arc joins the 2 points right here. Frame creates a frame around the ellipse. Axes show you the X and Y axis between the frame or on top of the frame. One more thing we need to do is change the mode to perspective circle, and let's just change these nodes to do something like this. Okay, let's remove the axis and let's remove the frame, and let's click on the perspective square option and the perspective axis option. And the perspective square gives you a frame, but this time the frame is in perspective, which should help you place the ellipse inside of a plane that is in perspective. And then the perspective axis are just perpendicular lines for this frame. You can also increase the axis rotation to rotate the axis as well as the frame right here. So this axis rotation will allow you to rotate both the frame and the axis of the ellipse. And with that done, that's it. Let's move on to the next one. The next path effect is the gears path effect. To demonstrate this one, I'll just make a shape like this one. Come over to the path effects menu, click on gears, and it turns your shape into a set of gears like that. If I press N to get the nodes tool, you can use the nodes of the object to change the shape and the size of these gears like that. You can increase the number of teeth and decrease the number of teeth using this option. You can change the this angle right here. It's supposed to basically, what this phi option does is it takes the angle and makes it sharper like that. Not very useful, but anyways, that's basically all you really get. And then the minimum radius basically makes the gears smaller and bigger. Let's give this a really big value, like 300. And that's basically what this does. Let's make it really small, see what that does. Let's go to 50. Also go to a value that is really, really big. And you see what that does? Not a very useful path effect. Anything this path effect can do, you can still achieve that using the pattern along path effect. And you have way more control over that. Right here, you don't really have too much control over what you're actually doing. And I just don't really see a use case for this specific thing in an actual project. I will say gears are not actually useless. They're actually quite useful to use inside of a project. Although this functionality right here doesn't seem very useful. So anyways, let's move on to the next one. The Interpolate Points path effect is a rather useless path effect. And let me showcase what I mean by that. Let me increase the stroke width. And with this selected, I'll come over to the path effects menu and click on Interpolate Points. And as you can see what that did, and that is all this path effect does. It just takes the corners right here and makes them smoother, and so it's basically kind of useless. The only thing you can change with this is the interpolator type, which they all give you slightly different results based on the one you choose. And so this path effect is kind of redundant, not exactly sure what it's supposed to achieve, but it is there if you want to use it. The joint type path effect changes the joint of an object. To showcase that, I'm just going to click on joint type, and let me zoom right in here. If you look at the options, you have a line cap and line width, as well as a join option. And the line cap, if you change the line cap to a different option, it gives you these few options right here. So you can go with rounded, peak, whatever. You can also change the line width if you want. Let's go to a bigger value like 500. And that's basically what that does. If you come over to the join type right here, you can change this to all of these different options. So depending on what you're looking for, you can get a joint that you want. And so that's basically what the joint type path effect does. Not exactly sure why it's even there, since you can do all of this using the fill and stroke menu as well as the nodes tool. But anyways, it is there if you want to use it. The next path effect is the B-spline path effect. To demonstrate this, I'll use this stroke right here with sharp corners. When that's selected, come over to the path effects menu, click on B-spline, and nothing visually changes once you apply this. But as soon as I change this value right here, you can see the path effect is applied. With this path effect, you cannot directly affect the actual path, but you can use these handles right here to control the smoothness of the path, but we can't necessarily directly change the shape of it. We can change the shape of it once we finalize the path using path object to path, but we don't want to do that right here. If you change the weight, it controls how smooth the radius of this path actually is, or this curve. If you right here we have the steps with control option. What this controls is to demonstrate this, I'm going to hold control on the keyboard, and I can use these handles right here to change the smoothness and the pathing or the curve right here that I get. To get more steps, I can increase the number of steps right here and hold control, and now I can go through or cycle through more steps to control the smoothness of this curve. And the same thing can also be done on this side. If you increase the helper size, it simply increases the helper size, and the helper is this blue circle right here. Apply changes if weight is equal to 0. Just applies the changes to those corners that have a 0 radius like this one. So I'll hold control and I'll change this into a corner node like that. If I uncheck this option, any change I make right here will only be applied to this corner right here, as you can see. The changes were not applied to this one, since the radius of this corner or this node is much greater than 0. And so that's basically what this does. And right here, if you select this, changes will only be applied to corners or nodes with a radius greater than 0 or a weight greater than 0. So let me change this to 30 and let's click right there. You can see the changes were only applied right here. They were not applied right here. So that's what that does. Change only selected nodes does the exact same thing, but this time it only applies to the changes to those nodes that are selected. So if I select that node and I come over here and change the value to something else, let's click right there to finalize that change. You can see the change is only applied to this selected node. To showcase what the uniform B-spline option does, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to give them the same radius value like that. And now I click right here on uniform B-spline, and you can see what that does. It makes the curves of both the nodes and their weights the same, so that the path looks uniform. With that said, that's it for this path effect. Let's move on to the next one. The next path effect is the construct grid path effect, and this is one of the most useful path effects inside of Inkscape. To showcase this, I'm going to make a rectangle like that, and with that selected, I'll come over to the path effects menu, click on construct grid, and as you can see, it takes your original shape and turns that into a grid. And the shape of the grid is based on the shape of the original object right here. So I'm going to use a different object this time. Let me use that. I'll click again to get the skewing handles, and I'm just going to skew this like that. And now I'm going to apply the path effect, and you can see the grid is now skewed like that. So the shape of the grid is based on the shape of the original object like that. I'm going to demonstrate a quick project based on this path effect, since I like it a lot, and I think it's one of the most useful path effects. So to demonstrate this, let me click on the rectangle tool, hold Ctrl and Shift, make a perfectly round square like that. And I'm going to give it a much thicker stroke. With this selected, I'll click again to get the skewing handles, and I'm going to use this handle right here to skew this object on the vertical axis about that much, maybe a little bit more, somewhere there. And now I'll press Ctrl D, duplicate that, flip that on the horizontal axis, and I'll turn snapping on, and I'll snap this object right there. And now I'll click right there, shift click right there, select them both, press Ctrl D, and then flip them. With them both selected, I'll flip them on the vertical axis like that. I'll hold Ctrl and drag this on the vertical axis. And now I'll press B to get the Bezier pen. I'll click right there, I'll click right there, snap right there, and I'll make a bounding box like that. I'll select both of these top objects, I'll delete them, I'll click on this one, and I'll give it the same stroke as these objects. And now I'm just going to click on this object right here. Come over to the Path Effects menu and click on Construct Grid. I'll click on this one and do the same thing. And I'll click on this one and do the same thing. And I'll get these three grids right here. I'm going to take the top grid, hold Control and just snap it right there. And now I'll select everything, come over to Path, click on Object to Path. And I'll select over everything again, come over right and click right here on the Shape Builder tool. And we're going to use these to create a nice and simple, a very simple and basic shape like that. And once you're done, once you're finished, you can click right here to finalize the changes, and you'll get something like that. What I want to do now is I'll select over everything and I'll give them a color like that, and I want to remove the stroke. And as you can see, we can independently change the color of all of these objects. And as you can see that we can use the Construct Grid Path Effect to create interesting logos like this one. Okay, the next path effect I'll go over is the Measure Segments Path Effect. To demonstrate that, I'll make a simple shape like this one. And we'll come over to the Path Effects menu, click on Measure Segments. And that's what this path effect does. It gives you labels of measurements for each side of this object. And I'm not going to go over every single detail of this path effect since it's so much that it can take its own entire video, but I will go over some of the important options. Okay, so the first thing right here is the unit. We can change the unit right here to whatever unit we want. Let me zoom in right here, and as you can see, we can change the unit to whatever we like. The other option I think that is useful is the changing the font and the font size. Let's change the font to this bold font. Let's increase the size to about 15. And you just do that and select. It will increase the font like that. You can see that the positioning right here of the line and the font is a bit messed up. And that will happen when you change the font or make some sort of a change. To fix it, all you really have to do is just click right here and change the position value just a little bit. And it gets fixed on its own like that. The next thing that is useful is the line width. If you increase the line width, you can increase the size of the arrows as well as the width of this line. You can also increase the scale, although this doesn't really feel very useful for graphic design or anything like that. This entire path effect seems like a path effect that made its way from AutoCAD into Inkscape. One more thing I want to go over is the scale sensitive option. Keeping this option on, if I resize the object, all of these values get updated automatically, and everything else scales with it. So if I make this really small, these values automatically are updated on their own. So that's really good as well. Let's come over to the projection menu. I can click on activate projection, and that's what that does. So this right here is what the activate projection option does. This is going to be much more useful if we have something like this. Let me create an object like this one. Come over to the Path Effects menu. Let's click on Measure Segments, and now we'll come over right here and click on Activate Projection, and you can see this is going to be much more useful for a shape like this, where you want to showcase its height, and you don't actually directly get the height. You can do this, and you can still come over here and increase these options right here, like that. And yeah, let's make this bold, and there you go. One more thing I want to show before I am done with this. I'm going to turn this off. One more thing I'm going to show. Let's just fix this. And the last thing I want to show is the Options tab. If you come over to the Options tab, you can click on the color and opacity, and you can change the color to whatever color you want this to look. You can give it a pink color if you want. And so that's basically the important functions of this path effect. Seems interesting that this path effect is available inside of Inkscape, but if you want to use it, it is there, you can use it. That's it. Let's move on to the next one. The next path effect is the ruler path effect. With this stroke selected, I'll come over to the path effect menu and click on ruler. And what that does is takes the stroke right here, and doesn't really have to be a stroke, but in this case it's a stroke, so it takes that and turns it into a ruler. And from the options we can change the unit. We can want to keep that on pixels. We can change the mark distance like that. We can increase the major lens size, which I want to increase, and we can also increase the minor lens size, and that's what that does. Major steps will increase the number of steps between each major step. So it will increase the number of minor steps between each major step, or between any two major steps. Let's showcase that and see. You can see what that does. And as you can see, the number of minor steps have now increased, and we only have only 4 major steps left. Shift marks shifts the marks like this, and offset does the same thing, but a little bit differently. Gives you more precise option to shift the marks like that. The mark direction just changes the mark direction. If you select both, you get a mark on both directions like that. If you select right, you get it on the bottom. If you select left, you get it on the top. And border marks control the borders. By default, it's set to both, and that's what it looks like. If you change it to end, you can see what that does. Change it to none, you can see what that did. And if you change it to start, you can see what that does. So this is good to have on both, like that. And so that's it for the ruler path effect. The next path effect is the show handles path effect. And to demonstrate what that does, I'll click right here on show handles. Now in this case, we cannot see any handles, since this path doesn't have any handles, since all the nodes are corner nodes. To fix that, we can select one of the nodes, right, like this, and turn that into a auto smooth node like that. And now we can see the handles as well. Let's scale the nodes and the handles to better see what that did. We can also select this node right here and turn that into an auto smooth node, and we can clearly see what that does. And that's basically what all this path effect does. From the options, you can decide to show the nodes or uncheck this. You can show the handles or not show them. You can show the path or not show it. You can show the center of the nodes or not show them. And you can show original, but I'm not exactly sure what this does. But that's basically it for this path effect. Let's move on to the next one. The next path effect is the Spiro Spline path effect. And this is a path effect that can sometimes be applied to an already created path. But for the most part, the way you actually use this path effect is through the pen tool or the Bezier pen tool. So either you can click on the Bezier pen or you can select the pencil tool. Either one is fine. And basically you select the Spiro, the second option right here, the Spiro path option. And as you begin creating a path, it will create a spiral. Something like that. And once you do that, you can see that it says the Spiro Spline path effect is already applied, but we didn't apply it since we already selected it from the options. It registers that as the path effect. I'm going to delete that now. And I'm going to delete that path. If you make a really smooth path though, sometimes you can actually apply it to an already created path as well. So I'm going to apply the Spiro Spline path effect like that, and as you can see in this case it does work. But if I create a very sharp path like this, and I apply the Spiro Spline path effect, it doesn't work. It does not work, and it's not going to work. So in this case you'll have to actually do it manually. But if you have a smooth path like this, it will be applicable in this case. And you can actually get very smooth spirals, and you can then edit that on your canvas and change it as much as you want, however you want. So that's basically how this path effect works. And so that is the end of this video. I really hope you guys learned something from this video. Let me know what I should make a video on next. And that is it. Thank you for watching.